Today, I'm going to be doing a deck tech on my budget Poison Storm EDH deck. This is a non-deterministic storm deck that wins by proliferating poison counters. We're going to be giving each of our opponents a poison counter with something like Prologue to Phyresis. Then, we're going to be drawing a bunch of cards, making a bunch of mana, and eventually casting a ton of spells. Then, when our storm count is 8 or higher, we're going to cast Radstorm to proliferate those poison counters up to 10 and win the game. First, a few quick notes about this deck. This deck is usually trying to present a win around turn 6 or 7. This deck is designed for bracket 3. It can sneak in a few wins in bracket 4 games for a number of reasons, but it's going to play best in bracket 3. Lastly, this is a budget deck, under $100. Now, let's start with why you might want to give this deck a try. This deck is very fun to play against. Most EDH decks are not built to take out all players at the same time. This often means that players who lose will have to sit out until the game ends. This deck does not have that issue. This deck can only win by taking out all opponents at the exact same time. Additionally, storm decks are often known for taking long, boring, drawn-out turns as they try and reach a huge storm count. This holds the rest of the table hostage as they watch the storm player play Magic alone. This deck solves that issue, as any storm count past 8 is completely unnecessary to achieve. Even an inexperienced pilot will take a very reasonable amount of time on their turns. An experienced pilot can take very quick turns. These two qualities both make the deck very fun to play against. This deck is also very fun to pilot. Because it's so resilient, it never feels like you're out of the game. We can still operate with very few permanents in play. This deck is in no way reliant on the commander. Even cost reducers aren't needed to win. This deck can and has won with no non-land permanents in play. This means that the deck is great in a group that plays lots of removal. If that sounds appealing to you, then let's get into the basics about this deck. We are only running 10 creatures, 4 artifacts, and 2 enchantments. Most of these are cost reducers. We are running 28 instants and 24 sorceries. That's over half the cards in the deck. The average mana value of this deck is only 2, but it feels much lower because of cost reductions and free spells. Because our spells are so cheap, and we have so many non-land mana sources, we're only running 35 lands, 4 of which are NDFCs. Most of the cards in this deck can be broken down into 3 categories: cards that deal with counters, cards that make or fix mana, and cards that give us access to more cards. Some cards, like Infectious Inquiry, can do multiple of these things. Some cards, like Snap, can do these things, but only under certain circumstances, like if we have a cost reducer in play. Now, let's start out with cards that deal with counters. First, we'll cover our poison spells. Prologue to Phyresis is a 2-mana, blue instant, and therefore tutorable with Merchant Scroll, Waterlogged Teachings, and Mystical Teachings. This card gives each opponent a poison counter and draws a card. This is probably the ideal target, or possibly the only target, when tutoring for a poison spell. Infectious Inquiry is a 3-mana black sorcery that draws 2 cards and gives each opponent a poison counter. This card is an ideal tutoring target if you are lacking cards and a poison spell. Unfortunately, our most efficient tutors can't find black sorceries, so we are usually not tutoring for this one. Phyresis Outbreak and Vraska's Fall are both 3-mana poison spells that double as removal. Phyresis Outbreak is a sorcery, but it can be an asymmetric board wipe with the proper setup. Vraska's Fall is a bit worse, but it's instant speed. These cards really start to shine when you cast them for the second time with Kess. Next, let's talk about Proliferation. Radstorm is a 4-mana blue instant and therefore tutorable with Merchant Scroll, Waterlogged Teachings, and Mystical Teachings. It says Proliferate and Storm. This entire deck is inspired by and built around this card. It is, in a way, our secret commander. Most of the games we win will be won by casting Radstorm. Remember that you can cast it a second time from your graveyard when we have Kess in play. Doing so will drastically reduce the storm count needed to win. This ability also lets us use Radstorm to proliferate something like, for example, the oil counters on Mindsplice Apparatus to give us value, which then lets us snowball into more mana, more cards, more spells, and eventually a win when we cast Radstorm for the second time from the graveyard. However, we can't always rely on Radstorm, and so we have Flux Channeler as an alternative. Flux Channeler is a 3-mana creature. It's not a very good blocker, but it basically turns all but 9 of the spells in our deck into proliferation spells. This can very quickly sneak out a win, often without casts. It will, however, not stay alive very long. It's often best if you wait to play this card until you're in a position to win with it on the same turn that you cast it. It's very unlikely to survive a turn rotation. If we can't win with Radstorm or Flux Channeler, we also have Karn's Bastion. Karn's Bastion is a land that taps for 1 colorless mana. We can also pay 4 mana into it and tap it to proliferate. Now, this is a terrible rate. We will only be using this in the most dire of circumstances, or on occasion, to proliferate non-poison counters for value. Finally, we have our non-repeatable proliferation spells. All of these spells either draw a card or remove something. It's often best to save these until you have counters to proliferate. Next, let's move on to making and fixing mana. We'll start off with our more traditional rituals. Seething Song is an instant, and therefore tutorable with Waterlog Teachings and Mystical Teachings, but notably not Merchant Scroll, as Seething Song isn't blue. It costs 1 to 3 mana, depending on cost reducers, and usually makes 2 to 8 red mana. This is because Kess lets us squeeze a little extra value out of our rituals by letting us cast them a second time. We also have an abundance of cost reducers, so we usually have at least one in play. These two things combined make it possible, or perhaps even likely, to cast Seething Song twice for 1 mana and make an additional 8 mana for a total of 9 red mana. We also have Mana Geyser, a sorcery that costs 2 to 5 mana and will usually go at least mana neutral, but will often gain you 10 or more red mana. Lastly, we have Inner Fire. Inner Fire, a sorcery, is at its best when we are storming off. We will often draw into it when we have lots of cards in hand, and then cast it for 1 to 4 mana to make a lot of red mana. Now, let's move on to our less traditional rituals. Frantic Search and Snap, both very tutorable blue instants, can untap lands. Without cost reducers, they go mana neutral unless you have lands that tap for more than 1 mana, such as the multiple bounce lands we're running. With these, and or cost reducers, they go mana positive. We also have cards like Big Score and Inspired Tinkering that can go slightly mana positive when their cost is reduced to 1 red mana. When adequately cost reduced, even Dance with Calamity can go mana positive if you hit a card that makes mana, or a card that draws a card that makes mana. Cards like Big Score and Inspired Tinkering also act as color fixing, as most of the color fixing in this deck is done with red spells that create treasures. The general idea is to turn the red mana we make from our rituals into treasures that we can then use to cast any spell that we may draw into. Many of these spells that create treasures also double as ramp, filtering, and even removal. The number of pips and mana costs were kept to a minimum across the board to make color fixing easier, and for purposes of cost reduction. Next, let's go over our cost reducers. I would put these into 2 categories. We have slow, high ceiling cost reducers that are 3 to 5 mana, and fast, high floor cost reducers that are 2 mana. The slow reducers are cards like Mindsplice Apparatus, which can have counters put onto them, cards like Steamkiln Artist that don't technically reduce mana costs, or cards like Archmage of Runes that do more than reduce instants and sorceries. These cost reducers that use counters are usually a lot more mana to cast, but we can then proliferate these counters and reach absurdly high cost reductions to let us do insane things like casting Dance with Calamity twice for 2 mana. These slow, expensive cost reducers usually need to survive a turn rotation before we can actually untap our mana to then utilize them. Our fast cost reducers usually don't scale up nearly as well, but they can often be utilized the same turn in which you play them, or they can just be played very early in the game. We can often play these cost reducers as we draw them when attempting to storm off without ruining our storm attempt. Finally, let's go over our card draw. We have Wren's Resolve and Other Wren's Resolve. These both act as a way to dig for land drops in the first 2 turns of the game if we keep a 2 land hand. Or they let us spend a very small amount of red mana when storming off to look at just a few more cards. We also have Pull from Tomorrow, a blue instant that can draw us very many cards when a cost reducer is in play. We also have Silver Scrutiny, another blue X spell, but this time as a sorcery that's instant speed when X is 3 or less. Lock and Load can be a very explosive card draw spell, as, in this deck, it essentially reads, draw a card, storm. We also have a ton of ways to dig for specific cards. While useful on their own, we can then play these dig spells for the second time from the graveyard to go card positive. We can do this with any cantrip as well. Let's move on to our interaction package. For interaction, we have a lot of spells that proliferate. Some of these removal spells, like Grim Affliction, will likely need to be cast a second time to actually kill something. We have a few bounce spells that can be used as removal, or they can be used to bounce Kess, so you can then immediately recast her. When we do this, she becomes a new object that doesn't track any spells you had previously cast from the graveyard that turn with the former Kess. We also have a few counter spells, but they are all modal, so that they won't be dead draws when attempting to storm. Soul Manipulation, a black and blue instant, can be used to counter a creature spell, but can also be used to return a creature card from our graveyard to our hand. This is often very useful, as our cost reducers tend to be removal magnets. Next, let's talk about winning at instant speed. If an opponent casts enough spells, we can cast a poison spell and then Rad Storm on their end step to win right then and there. Or, more likely, we can cast Born Upon a Wind on an opponent's end step to get a head start on our storm count. Much of the deck is also instants, and so you may be able to draw into Born Upon a Wind or even win without it. If you attempt to win at instant speed, remember that Kess's ability only works when it's your turn. The only way to play instants and sorceries from your graveyard on an opponent's turn is to cast Mission Briefing. And that's all I've got for this deck tech. This deck list is linked in the description, and if you have any questions or comments about this deck, feel free to leave a comment down below. And if you want more videos like this, let me know by hitting subscribe. Thanks.